Right. Good evening and welcome. Those of you who have come for the first time, we extend a warm welcome to you also and hope that you will come again sometime in the future. We are continuing our series of talks on the sayings of the Buddha from the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada being one of the most popular and well-known of all of the collections of the Buddha's sayings. And this evening we're going to have a look at two verses from the Dhammapada, the chapter on Dharma, verse number 262 and verse 263. And these two verses make a rather interesting statement. They say, "Not by mere eloquence or beauty of form is one considered beautiful if he is jealous, selfish or deceitful. But one in whom these things are destroyed, uprooted, extinct, and who has cast out hatred, that one is rightfully called beautiful." And I thought it would be interesting to talk about this or these two verses today because they concern a subject that I think is sometimes understood, misunderstood in Buddhism, and in fact in some other religious traditions also. And this is the idea of the beautiful, or the idea of beauty. It seems that the main misunderstanding about beauty in Buddhism is that somehow or another beauty is a dangerous thing, it's somehow related to craving, and wherever possible you must fix your attention on old things, ugly things, dirty things, decrepit things, and as much as possible turn your eyes away from anything that's beautiful. Some people even think that if you're a good Buddhist, you must look as ugly as possible. For example, you must never smile. You must never wear makeup or flowers or decorations or anything like that. Try your very best to look as ugly as you possibly can, and somehow or another this will make you spiritual. This is not a misunderstanding that applies only to Buddhism. In the West, the development of Puritan Christianity in the 16th and 17th centuries, they had a fairly similar idea, that you must be very austere and unsmiling, churches or temples must be completely undecorated, try to wear black wherever possible, the colour of death, and try to be as cheerless and as unhappy as possible, and this will make you very profoundly spiritual. And as we'll see from these two verses this evening, that there seems to be a misunderstanding there. But of course, this won't be, as we will see, the only misunderstandings there are about beauty. Before we go on, we'll actually have a look a little bit more carefully at this verse. Not by mere eloquence or beauty of form. Here, first of all, the Buddha is speaking about eloquence, which is vakarana matena, which means to speak beautifully. Eloquence is the style, the tone, and perhaps also even the contents and the sound of your voice. So some people are very eloquent speakers in that they can weave together their words, their phrases in such a way that they sound very beautiful to the ear. Some people are eloquent speakers in the tone of their voice. There was a great, or a very famous, or perhaps I should say infamous Indian teacher who died only recently, who was famous for the beauty of his voice. It wasn't just that the things he said were very clever and in some cases insightful, but the smoothness, the clarity of his voice was such that certainly in my own case, having heard him, I was almost transfixed by the beauty of his speech. Okay. And then the Buddha goes on to talk about Vana Pakarataya. Varna means colour, and it can refer in the ancient Indian context to the colour of your complexion. So we talk about people as having a radiant complexion, or a golden complexion, or a clear complexion. Okay? The sort of thing that every woman wants to have, for example. Spend hundreds of millions, in fact nowadays I think it is billions of dollars a year buying various products and what have you, which will not give them a clear complexion, but rather will restore and bring out their already existing clear complexion and their the beauty. You don't dye your hair anymore, we don't use that word. You bring out or highlight its natural beauty or its natural colour. However, in the Indian context, when we're talking about Varna, we're talking about more than just the tone of your complexion. We are actually also talking about race. Because in the India at the time of the Buddha, and indeed today, you have what's known as the Chatuvarna, the four castes, or actually the four colours. It was believed, and indeed in India today still people do believe, some people, that the higher caste people are more pale and therefore more beautiful. They are a race apart. They are the superior colour. And in fact, even today, if you go to India, people will spend a great deal of money trying to look as white as they possibly can. Okay. Which is very interesting, because India as often sees itself as the leader of the third world, and perhaps rightly so, and there's constant criticism in India of the terrible regime in South Africa, but in actual fact there are few places in the world where people are so colour conscious. Black is ugly. White, pale, or as pale as possible, is beautiful. So if you read in the Statesman or the Hindu or any of these very good Indian newspapers, they have on the front, inside the front page, the marriage market, about how you can buy a wife or what good-looking young men are available to be married off. And sometimes nowadays they even say, caste no bar, meaning if you've got enough money we don't really mind which caste you come from. But inevitably they'll always mention colour. She's very pale. Or recently I saw one, dark skin but a lot of money. So there you've got to take your pick. Dark skin, that's a bit of a disadvantage. On the other hand, she's got a bit of money. So their way, colour is very important. And of course, we'd be making a mistake if we thought that colour consciousness was just a problem or just something that was considered important in India. Throughout the world, people have tended to think that me, being a different colour from those people or from that race, I am superior to them. Okay? So here when the Buddha is talking about beauty, varna, he's talking about perhaps not just beauty of complexion and beauty of colour, but perhaps also the belief that certain physical characteristics, a long nose or short nose or certain shaped eyes, that different races and groups of people have, that some of those may be more beautiful than others. But here the Buddha is saying that despite what we normally think, beauty of voice and beauty of form doesn't make you sadhu rupo. Sadhu, well, here in our society and Buddhists throughout the world, when they finish doing their devotional practice, the puja to the Buddha, they go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. It means good, auspicious, wonderful. So here the word is sadhu rupa. Rupa means form or shape. So sadhu rupa means auspicious shape, or, to give it a less awkward English rendering, physical beauty. Okay? So voice, colour, complexion, and the shape of the face, the Buddha says, doesn't make you beautiful if you are isati, machati, and satta. Isati, or as they say in Sinhala, isya, means jealousy. Machati is selfishness. And satta or sato is craftiness, deceit, treachery. Now, if you think about those qualities, there are quite a lot of mental characteristics which are not particularly attractive. For example, pride. We find pride in others, at least, to be a rather unattractive trait. We find talkativeness or narrow-mindedness rather ugly traits, we might say, rather unattractive traits. But there are few things that we would find as ugly, as unattractive, as unappealing as a jealous, selfish, crafty and treacherous type of person, mainly because those particular qualities would have an effect upon us. These are all projected qualities. So, for example, if I'm very proud, which I'm not incidentally, but if I'm very proud, others may find that amusing, particularly if I've got nothing to be proud of. They might find that amusing. It doesn't really affect others if I'm proud. But if I'm jealous, if I'm selfish, and if I'm a treacherous, cunning and crafty person, this will immediately have an effect upon others. So jealousy is a response to other people's success or some goodness that they've done or some advantage that they enjoy. You've got something that I haven't, and I feel jealous. Now, generally speaking, we don't stop at simply feeling jealous. That affects how we act towards the person to whom we have the jealousy. The selfishness is exactly the same. What could be worse than you're standing on the side of the road waiting for a taxi? You've been there for 10 minutes. You know what it's like here in Singapore. Somebody jumps in about 10 feet further down the road and takes the taxi that you've been waiting half an hour for. Selfish people will do this. Selfishness is a lack of concern for others because of an overwhelming concern for oneself. There is what is called enlightened self-interest. This is where we have what you might call a healthy self-concern without necessarily causing inconvenience or distress for others. But normally when we speak of a selfish person, we're talking about somebody who creates difficulties or problems for others. They are so concerned about their own benefit that they act in a way that is detrimental to the benefit of others. And we find this unpleasant. And of course, craft, deceit, treachery. This is a terrible thing too, because one thing that's so important for human relationships is a degree of reliability and trustworthiness. One of the most wonderful things that you can have as far as social relationships are concerned are somebody that you can always trust, that you know will always be there for you in good times and bad, and so on and so forth. Okay? That if you say to a person, look, I have to tell you this particular thing, I need somebody to talk to, don't tell anybody else, and they say, you can trust me, and you know that you can trust that person, then there's a certain degree of predictability, and this gives us confidence, it gives us certainty in our relationships. Now, when you come across a deceitful or treacherous person, you trust them and they betray your trust. You rely upon them and you find out that they're unreliable. Despite all their proclamations, they're treacherous, deceitful and dishonest. This has a very detrimental effect upon us. And thinking about these three things, they tend to go hand in hand, don't they? They're three related defilements. A selfish person generally is jealous. And when we're jealous, we tend to want to undermine others. That requires a degree of treachery and dishonesty. So, the next question that these two verses raise is the idea of beauty. What is beauty? Subha means beauty. Varna, Suvarna means radiant beauty. Svarupa, there's quite a lot of words. Even in English and in most languages, there are many synonyms for the idea of beauty. Beautiful, beauty, attractiveness, and so on. But despite the fact that we have many words for this thing, this quality, it's not an easy thing to define, is it? What is beauty? And of course, immediately the words of Shakespeare pop into one's mind. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And of course, these words they're popular, and they also happen to be very correct. One thing that you really notice is that ideas of beauty in different cultures and at different times differ enormously. The type of paintings that we may hang on our wall today would have definitely been considered hideous only 100 years ago. What is considered beautiful in this culture or this time may not be at another time. People have attempted to define beauty, a standard of beauty which is universally accepted, a definition of beauty which is universally accepted. And they've had very little success at this. But if we wanted a dictionary-style definition of beauty, we might say that beauty is a combination of qualities that gives pleasure to the senses. That's not a very satisfactory definition, but it will do for the time being. There are certain shapes, forms, the balance of form, textures and colours. There are certain tones in sound which are perceived or experienced as being beautiful, at least by some people. But generally we can say is the idea is fairly difficult to define. Now, going on a little further, we can't define beauty perhaps. It seems to be difficult to define, but we do know it when we see it. We know when other people see it, although what they experience as beauty, we may not. You'll have had this experience. I had this experience sometime recently. I was sitting on a bus, and there was a young man and a woman got onto the bus, and it was very obvious that the way they were looking at each other, the way they were looking deeply into each other's eyes, that they were perhaps madly in love. And I looked at the young man, and he seemed to me to be, I could imagine that a young woman would be interested in him. He had a good body, his attractive hair, clean complexion. Okay? And then I looked at her. Goodness me, is he blind or something? I thought to myself, what does he see in her? Perhaps she's got a lot of money or something. But of course, that was only my perception. I might look at a particular woman or a person and say, well, you know, I may be a monk, I may have been celibate for a few years, but I know a good-looking woman when I see one. And I might point that out to another person, and they may say, which one, that one? Yes. What's so nice about her? See? Our ideas differ a great deal. But, however, when we do experience beauty, we know. We have a particular feeling. It affects us in a certain way. And the thing about beauty is it affects us in a very specific way. It gives pleasure. It's pleasant to have or to come into contact with things that we perceive as beautiful. So, for example, almost everybody, since the beginning of time, since human beings have been human, they have made objects, crafts, things to be used in practical life, cooking pots, weapons, household utensils. And apparently since the beginning of time, they've done what is really a very human, a uniquely human thing to the things that they've made. They've decorated them to try to make them beautiful. They've put specific markings, designs, paintings, colours. They've shaped them in certain ways. They've carved things. It seems to be a uniquely human characteristic. And it seems that they've done it because an ordinary practical, something that has practical utility, appears to be more pleasant when it's decorated. So we like to hear certain types of sound that we consider to be beautiful. We've even developed a unique activity, composing and playing music. We've developed these highly complicated instruments for the specific purpose of making certain sounds, because we like to hear these particular sounds, these sounds that we perceive as beautiful. Our eye moves in our head towards things that we consider to be beautiful. Okay? We spend a great deal of time and money importing or exporting certain objects because they taste delicious, beautiful. And not only do we want them to taste nice, we want them to look nice. So before we consume the food that is put on our plate, we will attempt to decorate it, to make it look attractive. And it's a very strange thing, and it's perhaps hard to understand when you attempt to explain what it is, but all we can say is that it's very difficult to know what beauty is, but we do know it when we experience it, and we like to have it because it gives pleasures to our senses. It seems to be natural for human beings, in some way perhaps life-enhancing, to experience as much beauty as possible. Now, in this particular verse, the Buddha seems to, in some ways, challenge us to reevaluate or redefine or reassess even the whole idea of beauty. It seems that he's asking us to have a look at our assumptions of beauty and redefine them. He says, not by mere eloquence or beauty of form is one considered beautiful if he is jealous, selfish, or deceitful, but one in whom these things are destroyed, uprooted, extinct, and who has cast out hatred. That one is rightfully called beautiful. Now it seems to be here what the Buddha is doing is asking us to have a look again at the idea of beauty. And in fact, in the chapter from which these two verses come, all of the verses are a challenge to our normal way of looking at the world. For example, in verse 256, the Buddha says, not merely by making judgments is a person just. And then he goes on to suggest that a person who judges in a particular way is just. In verse 258, he says, not simply by talking a lot is somebody wise. Not by pontificating is one necessarily wise. And one would have to admit very frequently that when people are believed to have written lots of books or attended lots of conferences or to be able to talk in a very particular way about a particular subject, we quite often assume therefore he or she must be very wise. I remember some time ago going to a talk that somebody delivered, and I found it very dull and very academic, and in fact large parts I didn't really understand. I even got the impression that the speaker didn't understand what he was saying. It often happens. And somebody was sitting next to me very, very transfixed to what the speaker was saying. And when the speaker had finished, they said to me, what did you think? And I said, I couldn't understand a lot of it. And he said, nor could I. Wasn't that wonderful? The idea being, I assume, that if you can't understand it, then it must be very wise. Okay? And in verse 258, the Buddha says, simply by pontificating or talking a lot or being able to be very articulate, somebody's not wise. And then he goes on, wisdom is something else. And in verse 260, he says, not by being venerable. Now, the word venerable in Buddhism is quite often used as a title. So I might be called Venerable Dhammaika, but the actual meaning of the word is venerable means aged, very aged. And we normally assume that an old person, a venerable person, is wise. Although in English we have a saying that there's no fool like an old fool. There's a lot of truth in that. But very frequently, you hear, oh, you can learn so much from the old because they've got so much experience. And indeed that may be true at times. But to assume that somebody is wise, venerable, simply because they're old, the Buddha said, would be a mistake. And here he's saying, in this verse, these verses 262 and 263, physical characteristics or physical beauty, according to me, according to the Dharma way of looking at things, doesn't make a person beautiful. In fact, what he's saying is there is other qualities that give subba, suwana, that give beauty. Now, there are many places in the Pali Tripitaka, in the sayings of the Buddha, where this same theme is discussed. One of the most beautiful is in the Anguttara Nikaya, where the Buddha compares people to Benares cloth. Now, you will know that Benares or Varanasi or Kasi, as it is sometimes called, it is the most sacred city for Hindus. It's on the Ganges. All devout Hindus would like to die in Varanasi so that they can be cremated and their ashes thrown in the Ganges. And since the time of the Buddha, even up till today, Benares is famous as a center of religion and culture and music. And it's also, even today, famous for its cloth. They call it Kasi cloth. Brides all over India, and in fact, even in Indian communities overseas, like here in Singapore, a bride will like to be dressed in Kasi cloth. She would like a shawl or a sari of Kasi cloth when she is married. This is the most exquisitely beautiful cloth to be found anywhere in the world. And it's interesting that even before the Buddha was enlightened, he said that when I was a prince, the only cloth I ever wore was Kasi cloth. And one of the delights of traveling in India is that if you know intimately the teachings of the Buddha and the historical information in his teachings, so much you see has not changed. If you go to Varanasi today, it will be impossible to enter that city or leave it without some wretched, rotten, persistent, nagging tout taking you and trying to take you off the opportunity. Last year when I was there, I was travelling with, last year when I was in Varanasi, I was travelling with somebody who hadn't been there before. We stepped out onto the street, straight away, half a dozen touts, "Oh, come to my brocade museum." A museum, my foot. And I said to my friend that they're all selling all this stuff. It's very expensive. And then I thought, well, even though it's expensive, it is beautiful to see. There's a work of art. That's the only work of art you can wear. And of course all the touts were saying, "You don't have to buy, just come and look." And I said, "We're not going to buy." "Not necessarily, we just want you to have a look." So, right. So I took him along, and they've got a particular trick. What they will do is they'll unfold all of it. And you keep on saying, "Enough now." No, and they'll unfold it because they think that you'll feel guilty that they took all their stock out and you didn't buy anything. So this is one of the tricks to get you to buy, you see. So we sat down, these fellows came at us, and bit by bit, from the shelf, he would take out this beautiful cloth, throw it up into the air and let it settle on the ground. And then throw up another one and let it settle on the ground. And one by one, gold, the colour of a peacock's tail, most beautiful. It's like being in a rainbow. My friend was enthralled. And we were looking, and the man said, "You want a Coca-Cola?" I said, "2 Coca-Colas. We're not going to buy." "Not necessary to buy, just look." Good. And this went on and on and on. And when I said to him, "Have you seen enough?" He said, "Yes, it's beautiful." I said, "You want to buy some?" He said, "No. How can I wear a sari?" I said, "Okay, let's go." Why, of course, the touts and the shop owner were very upset. But I held them to their promise. Not necessary to buy, just looked. We've looked, bye-bye. And even at the time of the Buddha, this cloth was celebrated for its beauty. And in the Uprooted Nikaya, the Buddha says, there are some people who are like kasi cloth. Okay? Kasi cloth is beautiful to look at. Kasi cloth is pleasing to touch. It's beautiful to touch. And then he says, even when kasi cloth is old and people can't wear it anymore, they don't throw it away. They store it up in a scented chest, or they use it to wrap gems in. They never throw it away. And then he says, a virtuous person, a person who has what we would call inner beauty, kindness, generosity, honesty, straightforwardness, that person is like kasi cloth. They're beautiful. Kasi cloth is beautiful to touch. It's pleasant to be in the company of a virtuous person, just as it is pleasant to touch kasi cloth. And even when kasi cloth gets old, people don't throw it away. They store gems in it. Likewise, when a virtuous person speaks, people treasure up their words. Okay? And of course, this idea, the idea that virtue gives you what you might call an inner beauty or a spiritual beauty, this is not an idea that is unique to Buddhism either. One of the great philosophers of the classical world, Polotonius, says, he says that you should try to make yourself beautiful the way a craftsman or a sculpture makes a statue beautiful. He says, withdraw into yourself and look. And if you do not find yourself beautiful as yet, do as does the creator of a statue that is to be made beautiful. He cuts away here. He smooths there. He makes this line lighter, that line more pure, until he has shown a beautiful face upon the statue. So do you also. Cut away all that is excessive. Straighten all that is crooked. Bring light to all that is shadowed. Labour to make all glow with beauty, and do not cease chiselling until your statue, and do not cease chiselling your statue until there shall shine out on you the splendour of virtue. So this idea that it's inner beauty that is more important than physical beauty or eloquence of voice is certainly not a uniquely Buddhist idea. But it's important to sometimes be reminded of this teaching, because in our society, in our culture, so much emphasis is given to the material, okay, rather than the psychological or the spiritual. Just think of how much money is spent to make people look beautiful. Okay? Facelifts and perfumes and what do you call this stuff you put on your face, makeup and all of this. If we spent, people say to me, I don't have time to meditate. But perhaps the half hour you spend doing your hair or putting on your makeup, all this sort of thing, okay, making yourself appear to be physically beautiful, perhaps if that time was spent on helping to make yourself spiritually beautiful, spending time in meditation or self-reflection, that might be more important. Now, what are the advantages of inner beauty as opposed to, say, physical beauty? We all want to be beautiful. You hear people wishing and desiring all sorts of things. But I can't ever remember hearing of anybody saying, "Oh, I wish I was ugly"? People don't want to be ugly. They want to be beautiful, physically beautiful. They want to be surrounded by beauty. They want to spend their life with a beautiful person. In human relationships, one of the most important initial points of contact between one person and another is what you look like. So if you've decided to go out on the town, to go out hunting for a husband or a wife or whatever, you'll spend money on clothing. You'll put all sorts of funny things under your arms and wherever else you put it, so that you smell nice, or at least so that you don't smell. You can buy these things to put in your mouth so that your breath smells nice. Until recently, if you're a woman, you would spend quite a lot of time doing up your face and your hair. Foundation, I know all about these things. Foundation and then powder and mascara. Okay. Shade this, shadow that. Okay. But of course, until recently it was only women who did that. Now men do that too. Okay. And quite honestly, in some ways, I understand why. A few years ago, I made some films for the Curriculum Development Institute, television films, and I went to the studio at the education department, and we rehearsed the script, and we did a few other things. And then the lady said, "Come down here to the makeup room." It never occurred to me that the makeup room was a place where you put up makeup. I wasn't quite sure what it was. Anyway, I sat in a chair, and before I knew what had happened, they had powdered my face, and I had just shaved my head, so they powdered the top of my head. They powdered the top of my head. And if you've never worn makeup before, which I haven't, it's a very strange, you feel all dry and it's strange, and you get some in up your nose and tastes funny. Anyway, later on, when I saw the film, my goodness me, I had no idea I looked so good. All the pimples and freckles and the shadows had gone. And later on, I asked the lady, I said, "Well, you really did a wonderful job. I understand why women wear makeup now." And she described to me what people do when they put up makeup. You can shade certain parts or lighten parts that would usually be shaded so that you can actually make your face look a slightly different shape than it is. It's a real art. Anyway, I understood why some people at least wear makeup. But of course the problem is that sooner or later the makeup has to come off. You can imagine marrying somebody who looks really marvellous, and then she goes to the bathroom at night, takes it all off. You wake up in the morning and my God, there's a monster next to you. She's a completely different person. Okay? And this should sort of make us consider that there are certain advantages in the inner beauty over the outer beauty, or the beauty of form. One of them is that if you're born beautiful, well, you can hardly be given credit for that. It's pretty much the luck of the draw, isn't it? If you happen to have perhaps good-looking parents, well, lo and behold, voila, you grow up and you have an attractive face, an attractively shaped body. It's no credit on your part. Okay? Inner beauty is made, and it is made through an act of will, according to Buddhism. We may already be born with certain virtues, certain characteristics, but that is because we have developed them in a former life. Okay? So we become our own creator. Physical beauty, that's all to do with genetics and biology. Okay? Inner beauty is something that we create and make for ourselves, as is inner ugliness. We are responsible. Okay? And the other advantage of inner beauty over physical beauty, of course, is that the ideas of physical beauty are notoriously unstable. What is beautiful in this culture is considered ugly in another culture. What is considered beautiful today may have been considered ugly yesterday. Okay? And you see this very much when if you travel or if you understand art. You take Peter Paul Rubens. Now, 250 years ago, he painted women in England. Lovely, sensuous, erotic shapes of women. His paintings were considered erotic. But if you look at the women that he painted today, they look absolutely disgusting. Because at that time, during the sort of later Baroque period, their idea of feminine beauty was of a woman about 20 who was pudgy, preferably with rolls of fat on her waist and her abdomen, okay, and as white as possible. Nowadays we consider it is very fairly important to have a sort of a tight, muscular body, slim body, and to be brown, coloured in some way. Or if you look at, I don't know, if you want an idea of masculine beauty, look at Louis XIV, only 200 or 300 years ago. Now Louis XIV, at his time, if you were a good-looking man, how did you look? Well, first of all, you had a white wig of white curly hair, probably going down to about your waist. And your face was completely white, powdered white. And you generally have a black spot on the side of your cheek like that. And you'd have tight silk stockings and high heel shoes with a buckle on it. Now, if you walk down the street today looking like that, people would laugh at you, and they would certainly doubt your masculinity. Because our ideas of what is good looking for a man has changed completely. Less than 50 years ago in China, there were still women who bound their feet. Okay? And men used to go almost hysterical with erotic desire just to see one of those tiny feet. Now we look at them and we feel sick. It looks like a deformity. It is a deformity. So the ideas of what is beautiful from a physical point of view are notoriously erratic. They're changing all of the time. But what people consider inner beauty, that changes very, very little. And it's almost universally appreciated that certain qualities of beauty. Nobody likes selfishness. Nobody likes jealousy. Nobody likes deceit. On the contrary, generosity, kindness, honesty, these are universally accepted, held up as admirable qualities. Okay. Long before the Buddha, such qualities were considered to be an important part of the characteristics of somebody who is pleasant, somebody who is acceptable. And undoubtedly 1,000 years from now it will probably be pretty much the same.